All right. I was going to see if some more of you could not give even greater homage, attention, and recognition to part of life's magnificent biotechnology, the kind of living architecture that presents a kind of absolutely impossible, but a kind of astounding, self-perpetuating feeding and reproducing system, dash, man, comma, his intellect, comma, and his secondary world. And some of the things we've been talking about, I was going to see if you couldn't wrap up and see that it is part of what would normally be three-dimensionally impossible, because there's no such thing as a self-fueling machine, other than the fact that at the 3D level, God, we're in parentheticals already. Other than at the 3D level, ordinary intelligence has to see, by any reasonable view, that this is a closed system, such as good old Newtonian physics or classic physics, that matter cannot be destroyed nor created. And then when pushed, all you can do is think, well, the Big Bang, that's somewhere, and then you can have Big Bang / God, cosmic forces. But yet what we're going to try and describe tonight, as we've been confronted with before, is three-dimensionally impossible, other than the fact that when you can hear it, it works. And when you can hear it and begin to see it, it is, compared to all other attempts, it is closer to a reasonable explanation. That is, it's operational as to how things operate in a particular way, into parentheses or something. Considering the secondary world, and being the fact that man is able to think about acting in addition to acting, and it makes, what this ends up, it makes the secondary world in a particular way a kind of laboratory for, and I'm just going to make up a phrase for you, it's meaningless, but it's a kind of second order creation. And we've already been talking about it, but it's in the secondary sense, in the intellectual sense, it's as though man, in a certain way, like a beta mode. It's not real creation in any sort of sense that man is, even in fact, of coming up with the development of the internal combustion engine. And there it is. A nice, decent example from General Motors, or maybe a good example from Ford or Nissan. That's for you people who happen to own General Motors car. And you look at it, and it is not primary. It would have never, we'll assume, I don't have time to wait around, we would assume that through upheavals, earthquakes, tornadoes, the movements of the tectonic plates. Don't write me, it's just, I like, well, the term is so close to Teutonic anyway, and here it is, Germany back on the move again. Think about it. I know the geologists, they call it that other, whatever it is, the tectonic plates. But it's close enough. I think what they had in mind, subconsciously, I think what they had in mind, these kind of upheavals of pushing whole continents around, that doesn't sound like the Germans? Teutonic plates? At any rate, just a joke, I guess. At any rate, nothing would have happened accidentally enough that would have ever produced an internal combustion engine. Now, it all came out of the ground. It all came from primary sources. It all came from matter. Now, people just don't, it's no secret, but people do not normally think about it in that way. It all came right out of the ground. It's just laying there. But it would have never formed itself together, we'll assume. That even if you went along with biological evolution, which I'm not arguing one way or the other for you, but you can assume, let's take the good old modern view, that in some way the elements themselves, through certain pressures and through certain atmospheric changes and lightning hitting just right, and perhaps the tectonic plates coming into play, create little living organisms and little bacteria and then cells and then man. Let's go along with that. But you don't see any proof, any indication at all that that would have worked in the non-biological world. That is, that the elements would have ever arranged themselves through all kinds of upheavals to where finally life would have produced a functioning internal combustion engine. That one day you just, out of the sea comes this 8-cylinder engine, coming up on the So the point being that there is a kind of secondary or second order creation that you can look at an internal combustion engine and say that that is a form of creation, and for whatever reason, that the Big Bang, the gods, the cosmic forces that were put in motion through biological evolution did not go along those lines and show no signs of doing so. Why should they? Now, because men do it. But men do it through what means? This and this alone. Men do not do it accidentally. Men do not get out such as, there are even people now who have theories in zoology that certain primates fool around enough picking up sticks, and chimpanzees playing with sticks, and one day a chimpanzee took a stick and hit a coconut and it opened. And he looked at it, and some others did it. And that they sort of developed that. There's those kinds of theories floating around now. In other words, we're down to a primary level. It is certainly not a secondary level. That if those sorts of things happen, you would have to call that a kind of primary creation again. But man, or chimpanzees, any other creature, is not going to accidentally go around, and beat on some ore in the ground, and beat over here on some aluminum. I know there's no aluminum mine, but you're not going to beat on stuff and suddenly an internal combustion engine spring up. Do you follow? It is thinking of action. In other words, it would not happen down at the material level. Men would not get down and roll in elements, roll down in mines and roll in all sorts of things, and suddenly, accidentally, like the great old idea of enough chimpanzees with enough typewriters given enough time, would accidentally type the complete works of Balzac. They always say Shakespeare, but what the hell? Why not Balzac? The man's very seldom read anymore, and I'm sure the copyright laws are long enough, his estate could use a few bucks. But that's the same kind of idea, although they are mixing their metaphors, if not their apples and metaphors, together to say that primary creatures, that is, non-secondary world creatures such as chimpanzees, could take secondary world instruments such as typewriters and accidentally, finally, type out the complete works of Dickens. Give them all a shake. No such thing would happen. There is no way accidentally, or nothing to lead you to believe. Not one cent of proof, evidence that would lead you to think that an internal combustion engine, the lights, the cameras, clothes would have ever accidentally come about through just physical manipulation, accidentally, of chimpanzees, orangutans, accountants, attorneys, just kind of fooling around with stuff, and suddenly here is a light bulb. It took this. This is a specific kind of second order creation. I'm just saying second order, we had to call it something. But do you hear me? It is the things now on this planet that were it not for man, and were it not for man having an intellect functioning, there would be a whole order of creation non-existent. All of this was still the intro. So what I want you to try and tie in together are such things that we have been talking about as this. You recall the guy with his dog. The dog's eating grass, and the guy's standing there, and he thinks, why do dogs eat grass when it very often makes them sick? And he realizes the dog can't talk. As fast as the movement of electrons, he could also think, well, I could look it up in the book, or I've got a friend that's a vet. Next time I'm there, I'll ask him. And then he could also think, well, it's a shame the dog can't talk, because that just shows the kind of a skewed nature of life, because I'm going to have to go find a veterinarian, or I'm going to have to go check out a book to find out why dogs eat grass, when here's the dog. I've had him for years, he's one of my best pals, and I just can't ask him, why in the world do you eat grass? Because if he could talk, here's the person to ask, right? Wrong. Remember? Because notwithstanding the fact that he can't talk, if he could talk, he wouldn't know. And if you find that to be strange or questionable at all, then we're left with this. At the ordinary playing field of your intellect, if I ask you, and you had the ability to be, what do they call it? What people like to laughingly call truthful. And I could ask you, why is it that you go out and have a few drinks almost every night after work, and you get up feeling bad. Just for instance. In other words, why do you eat grass and throw up? Now, of course, if you were ordinary, your little intellect would run like a rat to a hole, and you'd say something like, well, now wait, I know what you're saying, but I'm under a lot of stress. Or, I come from a family that mistreats children, and I don't know, I even grew up with a lot of traumatization to my little psyche. But you surely hear me. The truth is, you've got no idea. There is no way to justify, and I just picked out one thing. You could ask somebody, why is it I see you overeat a lot? You're always carrying around those antacid pills. And it doesn't have to be anything that seems to be some bad habit, such as drinking or overeating. You could ask somebody, why is it that you have such a bad temper? I've been watching you for years, and you've lost 2 or 3 jobs, if not 2 or 3 wives and lovers over your temper. Yeah, I know that. So what? Well, why do you do it? Why do you eat grass and then throw up? As you should know by now, the ordinary intellect cannot answer questions as to why it does what it does. And that's part of the job of the secondary world, is to come up with these apparent explanations, and it keeps energy moving, because somebody can say, well, every time I drink, I don't get a hangover. Well, sure you do. I've been watching you. Well, all right, even if I do it, I've been under a lot of pressure. All right, you're not under more pressure than anybody else. Yeah, I am. No, you're not. Prove it. I don't know. Do you see? It goes nowhere. It cannot be proven. And it's not just that. It is to ask anybody why you are in any particular manner what you are. Why do you do so-and-so? Why do you act in a certain manner toward your family, toward other people? And somebody can attempt to give an explanation, but they do not know. So you're left, if you can begin to see this temporarily, that the proper, if you're seeking information about a creature, the proper place to inquire is not with the creature. And it's not just dogs. Now you get the humans. And we can point out that as far as the three-dimensional observable world, humans are the only creatures on this planet that attempt to study themselves. They would attempt to explain themselves, since they're the ones that can talk, but they're the ones who seem to try it. Does that make them an exception to what I just said? It's obvious that the dog is not the one to ask about dog behavior, since the dog can't talk. And so then you can think, well, humans then are an exception to that. Are they? When I say creatures, don't just take it as being the class of Homo sapien. Let's take it individually now. Any individual human, let's get past dogs. Now we're into humans who do study themselves, who do observe themselves, who do explain themselves, who do talk. And now when I say the creature, I'm talking about the individual creature, not the creature man. An individual creature. To ask a man, a woman, why do you eat grass? Then now we are surely on a fairly firm footing. That this particular person, if you don't know why do you act this way, who are you going to ask? You know, don't say Ghostbusters. You ask the person, right? Well, I hate to do this, but the answer again is, huh? Now the answer to, if you want to know about a dog and if he could talk, he would be the creature to ask, right? And the answer is wrong. So in this case, I was trying to ease up a little and say, well, now if we're going to talk about individuals and you ask a human, why do you do what you do, then that one individual that you're interested in is the one to ask, right? And I was trying to be nicer than just say wrong. That's why I went, huh? Because is it? Can the person answer? Let's expand it. Are they intended to answer? Do ordinary people, that is ordinary intelligence and anybody, does it even pretend that it's going to answer? If it were true that an individual human, that the individual was the proper one to ask regarding why it does what it does, if that were true, here's what it would do. It would be cutting off one of the points where energy is transferred. Take it a second. If individuals that you're interested, why in the world would anybody drink alcohol? Or why would anybody take narcotics? Why would anybody take fool around with cocaine when you see what it does and the person's intelligent enough to know, I'm going to go ask somebody. And you find somebody that says, yes, I do a little almost every day, every weekend. You say, well, let me ask you this. And you ask the person. And you think, well, that is the person to ask. Now, what if it were true that you could ask? Why do you do this? And instead of them having to fall back to the ordinary secondary explanations as to, well, I've been under a lot of pressure and etc. What if, whatever the explanation would be, which I'm not going to tell you what it would be, but what if each person actually could explain why they do what they do? Do you see what that would do? That if indeed one creature could ask another one, talking about humans now, one individual asks another one, could you explain yourself? Why do you eat grass? And no one tell you. You go, well, sure. Blah, 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 blah. What are you going to do with that? If indeed, whatever it was, that was it, that you ask anybody, well, why do you have such a temper? Oh, da-da-da-da-da. Oh, how about you over here? Why are you so shy? You are shy, aren't you? Would you tell me why? And the person would go, ma, 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 ma. Do you see that it would have cut off? It would be as though, in a symbolistic way at least, part of the circulatory system, let us say, for one example, in life's body, where man is, it would be like suturing up an artery somewhere. A point at which energy is transferred would be stopped. Because there's some energy transferred to go over to someone and say, oh, why do you eat grass? And the guy goes, oh, da-da-da-da-da. All right, so a little energy got transferred, but that's it. You're almost back to primary affairs. And if you recall what we're talking about, one of the possible multiple choice answers, ways in which to look at it as to pour K for what purpose, twee to what ends does man have the secondary world? One was, as I tried to get you to see, that the primary world, if that's all we had, primary affairs are so instant, so immediate, such as sex without romance. Just sex by itself, the primary affair, especially given if Masters and Johnson and all those people are correct and men were not trying to replay the batting scores of everybody in alphabetical order in the American League, that if it is true that the average man can engage in that wonderful pastime and be up and done with it in whatever it was, 90 seconds, then notice that is not very conducive to romance. It's not very conducive to a family. It's just you do it, the guy leaves. The primary world is too immediate to have ever accidentally produced the secondary world. It has to be done deliberately. It is, in a sense, a kind of expansion of the primary affairs, and it extends them. It turns the sex act, let us say, 90 seconds, or whatever they claim it is. The average man could do it. It goes from being 90 seconds to what? A 50-year marriage, let's say, back when people stayed married. But at least it's more than 90 seconds. But were it not for the secondary world, were it not for man and the intellect, there would be no romance. It would be too immediate. We'd be still dealing with primary affairs. That is, the reason I brought that back up, that is the kind of situation at which I am trying to hint would be going on if creatures could actually, individual humans, could actually explain themselves. That you could ask another human, why do you eat grass? And the persons went, da-da-da-da-dum. And as far as you could hear, you and everyone else engaged in this, that as far as you heard, that was the answer. Not an explanation, not episodic, an actual answer with a period that you went, oh. Now I'm saying that so that you never had any inquiry again, whatever it took. Do you understand? That has become too immediate. There was a little energy transferred in the same way we could say the sex act necessarily transfers energy. But if it was left at the primary level to where it was just a 90-second affair, then it would be too immediate, it'd be over, and that'd be the end of it, at least as far as the dance between that particular man and that particular woman that was a 90-second encounter. If creatures could explain themselves, it would be too immediate. But notice, since I suggest you most strongly open to your own investigation, of course, and some of your license in your state. That one creature asks another one, why do you do so-and-so? And the other one says, the other human says, and I can just make up an almost infinite variety of possible responses. Why do you eat grass? Why do you drink? Why you got such a temper? Another person goes, you talking to me? Or the other person goes, I was hoping somebody would ask. Or the person says, I don't drink that much. Whatever it is, the answer is not a true answer. And so what you're left with is some form of debate. What you're left with is some form of further discussion, whether it's overt between the two people, and let's say that very likely it's overt. Why do you drink so much? I want to ask you that. Well, I don't drink that much. Oh, come on. Well, I don't. Have you ever read that kind of list that AA puts out about one of the first things people... Wait, I know what you're going to say. You say they deny they drink that much. Yeah, I was. Well, all right, hell with that list. I don't drink that much. Come on. I don't. They could go on like that, and then they could see each other 2 months later and say it, or if this was a man and his wife, it can go on just it's like a continual running discussion. Do you see that the energy keeps getting transferred because no one accepts the explanation of the other person normally? That is, why do you eat grass? And whatever the explanation is, to some degree, if you're ordinary, you're not going to like it. You're not going to accept it. You're going to be critical of it. You're going to be doubtful. No matter who it is, your brother, your mother, your father, to ask him, why do you eat grass? Why do you treat me? Why did you treat me that way? Whatever they say, you're going to have some comeback. In other words, that is not going to be the energy response in toto. That even if you ask, why do you do so-and-so, and the person says, hey, leave me alone. Damn it, leave me alone. And you walk off. Is that the end of it? Not normally, because you can walk off and think, Jesus, what's wrong with him? And you come back. Or you go away thinking about it. And you go and you talk to somebody. Hey, Paul's getting bad. And I tried to ask him again about his drinking and eating grass. And boy, he's getting to the point. Now, you remember last year we could talk to him a little about the drinking and the eating grass, but now I tried to combine them, and he almost blew it. He got mad. And so you can talk to your brothers and sisters. You go talk to a psychiatrist. The thing is, so we can leave, that should be enough. All you got to do is observe it. Because it's a fact that creatures, the individuals, humans, are not equipped, are not intended to explain themselves. They're not intended to tell you why they eat grass. But also notice, in life's magnificent biotechnology again, that even that on the broad scale of just putting out the general picture, that within itself helps churn up energy. Because nobody likes that whole, just the basic scheme of things. It's how come I ask you a simple question? I ask, why do you eat grass? Why do you drink all the time? Why do you always get mad at me? Listen, I know what's going to happen. I'll ask him, and he's not going to tell me the truth. So all throughout history, philosophically, religiously, in fiction, you've got people complaining. Always talking about the truth. How come humans can't admit the truth? Why can't people just steal them little selves and stand up and say, all right, I'll tell you the truth? Like, that's what we're working for. If we were civilized, if we had better education, if we would quit doing whatever we do, if we didn't have so much mercury in the paint or so much mercury in our garages, we could tell the truth. What truth? No, I don't talk. What do you mean, what truth? See, and I could get going with somebody else. What do you mean, what truth? Everybody knows what truth. The truth. Well, would you know it when you heard it? Which is really dirty because people assume, yeah. They assume, yeah, except no ordinary person can hear it, can prove it, because no ordinary person has ever heard what they think is the truth. But see, they never found that curious, that nobody on this planet has ever heard the truth. Everybody keeps denouncing everyone else, and even sometimes themselves, like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Subconsciously, I've got things that keep me from actually telling the truth. I get close. In fact, to my analyst, I think I'm getting close to a breakthrough. But I can't really tell the truth. But if you ask the whole world, how would you know if you heard the truth? Everybody go, well, we'd know. And if I said, well, how? There might be somebody here and there, of course I'm being foolish with rouse again, that nobody would know because they've got nothing to compare it to, because no ordinary intelligence on this planet has ever heard the truth. That's not my definition. Ask them. But they just never take it far enough to say, well, how would you know if you heard it? Since no one's ever heard it, you got nothing to compare it to. All the thing they can be left with is, well, all right, you almost got us there, but all that means is that no one's ever told the truth before. And I guess, and of course, if I was still that foolish, I'd say, okay, yeah, you know, keep going, and they go where? Then where to go? That is, they would not ask, "Por qué?" To what ends? Wow, why I think? Wait a minute, nobody has ever heard the truth. Or we all think nobody's ever told the truth. I never thought about it that way. That's curious, isn't it? That's not curious. Let's go. So they'd leave. No creature can explain itself. And it even goes a little bit further because, as all of you, I'm sure, know, philosophically and even into the world of metaphysical cults and everything about studying oneself comes right up. But look at it another way, that not knowing oneself is very healthy and conducive to life's continued growth. Well, look at it. But now all of you do see that life is getting healthier, whether you like it or not. Well, if you're an ordinary old sorehead, you don't like it. You can always complain. But life is getting better for humans. So, not knowing oneself helps keep things going. And everybody that ever thinks about it, or if it's ever even pointed out to them, everybody within the middle of the bell curve of life's intellectual growth would deny that. They would naysay it directly, that that is not true. As a matter of fact, knowing oneself is important. Well, would you tell me one thing about yourself if I was ordinary? And they'd say, all right, I'll tell you this. I can be honest, because I've studied myself now a lot. I've gone through this and read a lot of books. And I can tell you this. I can tell you a few things. I got a real bad temper. And sometimes I'm inclined not to be honest. You figured all of that out by yourself. You know, 23 years you worked at that. I'm just being silly. And if I say, all right, now you told me something. And they say, yes. I'm not proud of some of what I do, but I've studied myself and I decided to just face up to my own shortcomings. Okay, so you got a bad temper and you're inclined to dishonesty. Yeah, I am. All right. Why? No one knows why. So can you call that self-knowledge? That was part of my little sarcastic drama. Is somebody say, well, I have studied myself. I went to Kathmandu, and I studied there for several years with Bob Seger or whoever was there. And I chanted and I prayed and I did all kinds of things. And I have really gained some self-knowledge. It knocked a few years out of my career, which I don't want to go into. It had to do with accordions and French bread. But it knocked a few years out of my career, but it was worth it because I really learned something about me. And the best they'd come up with, and this is no ordinary sarcasm, a few people that might be seeing this on tape, if you ever do, it's not sarcasm, but I went through the little drama because by now you should see that what passes ordinarily. The man went through all this trouble, went to Nepal, wherever he went, did all this study, and you say, well, what did you get out of it? I found out one thing. I found out I have got a horrendous temper. I mean, it's unreasonable. Wow. What a bargain that must have been. You know, because from one view, 10 years ago, you could ask the guy's mama. You could ask his first 3 wives. You could ask guys that just know him slightly that hang around and have a few beers with him in the corner. And you just said, can you describe old Hubert in one word? And they went, yeah, mad. Pissed. And he said, yeah, well, it ain't the same as self-knowledge. And you say, yeah, I guess you're right. But still, the point is, if somebody gets that far, that's accepted as being something. It is accepted as being something of some value, but then if you say, well, why? Why do you get mad? Why do you eat grass? You're the only one that should know. I'm coming right to the dog, right to the source. Why do you do it? They do not know because they're not supposed to know. Or whatever they tell you is not supposed to be acceptable. And you're supposed to go, oh no. Don't you understand that if everyone could explain what they do to everyone else's satisfaction, it would be like this great symphony. let's say, with everybody on this planet got their little instrument, and they're all tuned up, ready to go, and it starts maybe over here, and you point at the first chair violinist, and he turns to the second chair violinist, and he plays a couple of notes. It's an inquiry like, why are you on the second chair? And the second chair gives him back, he plays back a few notes, and let us say that he actually tells, as they want to call it, the truth. That he tells why he's the second chair. Well, the first chair then would have nothing to say. In other words, he'd put down his bow, and the second one would not have anything to say. The rest of the orchestra that was all ready to join in, like, well, I'm on the first, the first chair violinist's side. And then somebody else would take, the bassoons over here, 2 or 3 over there, getting a fist fight and play over whose side they're on. But if it started off, and the first chair asked the second chair, why you're only a second chair, and the second chair told him something that the first chair accepted, that'd be it. Then you'd sit there with, 5 billion people on this planet, all sitting there with their instruments, and cobwebs growing on them. There'd be no sound, no energy moved. It'd all be over. No one, not only is supposed to not explain themselves, no one else is supposed to think they explain themselves, and no one is supposed to think, isn't this weird? And everyone believes that the truth has never been a common commodity on this planet, but no one's ever considered, well, if it was here, who would recognize it? Plus, isn't that weird? How about another aspect of this? In the secondary world, if you recall, we tried to point out that what you've got are the processes of life that start out, we could say, at the primary level, but you got the processes, and part of the intellect's job, part of the secondary world job is to take the processes and turn them into things specific. And then when it really gets going good in this kind of self-rejuvenating system, this kind of second order creation, processes can turn into things specific, and then the things specific can turn back into processes, and the processes turn back into things specific, and they keep rolling on. In specific, I was going to give another kind of example. How about the process? There is such, and I'm just going to have to make up a term for it, but let us say we've got a person over here that's in the sickness process. Ill, but a person's sick. The process, being in the sickness process, the person needs to become, for this to continue along a certain line, the person needs to become a thing specific. This person in the sickness process needs to become a patient, which is a thing specific. If a person in a sickness process becomes a thing specific, then they can be treated. And if they can be treated, they can continue to be part of the sickness process. Because a good, proper patient will continue to be treated, but will not get cured. Now, I'm using ordinary terminology because to be cured would be almost the same thing as a creature somewhere that you say, why do you eat grass? And the person turned around, the person, the dog, the patient turned around and went, oh, da-da-da-da-da-dum. And you, the doctor, you, the inquirer, went, huh. In other words, they told you the truth where it was. They answered it. That would be the end of it. Back to what we were talking about. It would be an unacceptable, just look the way things are, an unacceptable cessation of the energy flow. Patience in the full sense, all the way from medical, psychiatric, academic, family, the whole smear of trying to study oneself. You are supposed to be treated. You're supposed to be identifiable, made thing specific as a patient of some kind, even if you were attempting to undertake your own treatment, your own self-discovery, your own study. You cannot be part of an ongoing process. You've got to decide, well, wait a minute. I've fooled around with life long enough. I've always been interested in things esoteric. I'm going to become a seeker. I'm going to devote some time to this. I'm going to become a patient. To be treated in any way, you have got to stop being part of a process. If you're part of the sickness process, unless you're just going to disappear, probably die, you need to become a patient. If it's in lesser times, you might only become a patient of a witch doctor there in the village. But somebody, you have got to be identified between you and one other person. which you should recall is the only way the secondary world exists. There's got to be the second word. You got to have one word and then a second word. You got to have one idea, then a second idea to compare it to, for it not to be, to prop it up. So you and somebody else has got to decide you're a patient. You have become things specified. Then you can be treated. Not cured, because the point is not to cure anybody. Because to cure anybody would be to finally say, wait a minute, I've been treating you now for what? 17 years for eating grass. And the person says, I know, and it suddenly struck me why I eat grass. The patient has become a bad boy. The doctor, the treater, has lost a patient. The patient has lost somebody to dance with. The patient has lost a hobby. A patient has put, in a sense, if this happened in some willful way outside the normal flow of events, then life would have lost a juncture point at which energy was being transferred. A good patient continues to be treated until he dies or runs out of money, or the doctor dies. And I'm using doctor and patient in the widest possible sense, but it is not exclusive to medicine, religion. Of people saying, I am here to be treated. I am in some way sick. I am in some way infirm. I am in some way lacking. Now, that's good. That's good. A psychiatrist will tell you that. A doctor will tell you that. Somebody running an AA meeting, that you have got to come forward and say, listen, my name's Grunhilder and I'm a drunk. Who? No wonder you're drunk with a name like that. I'm an alcoholic. I'm addicted to Wagner. Oh my God, no. I am Wagner. No. The person has got to, I'm just using AA because that's a classic contemporary example, that one of their basic tenets, and it is with psychiatry, and it also is with medicine. They just don't put it that way. But if you are out dying of, or suffering from sclerosis of the liver, how are you going to get help? You're just sitting there on a street corner, and you're just sclerosing up a storm. Who can help you? Let us say that there are doctors around that do pro bono work, especially on the liver. That and automatic transmissions on the weekend. But they would be delighted to help you, right? But if you're just sitting there in a cardboard box over in the corner and your liver getting bigger and bigger, surely you realize this. Even you people with college educations, that you've got to get up and be like the alcoholic and go to a doctor and say, my name's Siegfried and my liver, and the guy goes, yeah, I see, but you got to say, I'm sick. You've got to say that to be treated. A doctor can't treat anybody. Doctors can't walk down the street and just run up to people and say, are you sick? They're not supposed to. Attorneys cannot attempt to help people by just jerking them out of their car and say, do you have whiplash? There has to be a kind of participation. The processes of life have got to be cut up, and people made things specific. For a person to be treated, they must be a patient. They must admit they're a patient, somebody who apparently, ostensibly, has the ability to treat. A doctor, an attorney, a priest, your mother, has to accept you as being a patient. So you both, would you like to dance? Yes, I would. But the dance is not supposed to stop. People are not supposed to be cured. People are there to be treated. That's all a patient's for. A patient is not there to be cured. A revolutionist, if we want to get really strange, is the only one that has any notion of being cured, any possibility. A patient is supposed to be forever. It's better than a diamond. It's not. Well, I assume that you hear this is no attack on medicine or the profession of law or anything else. That's not the point. But to be in a position of being a thing specific, and I don't mean that you're just a patient. You can be an attorney and be a patient and a husband and a father. But that becomes part of what you are, things specified. And to be that, you're not supposed to be cured. I bring this up because I know that many people still have questions and try and wrestle with, and I don't mean just physical ailments. I repeat, I was using treatment and being a patient in the widest possible sense, but people keep thinking that they're in some way trying to treat themselves, or that some kind of activity, maybe even this, is in some sort of treatment to help you. If it is, it's not going to help you, if that's all it is, because to be a good patient, to be a proper patient, you never get cured. That would be like asking life to dance, a certain aspect of life, a doctor, a priest, anybody to dance. And then just in the middle of the dance, now I say in the middle of the dance may go on for 50 more years. But there in the middle of the dance, you just suddenly want to throw up like you've been eating grass and walk off and leave them staying there. That's what I meant by bad patient. Tut, tut, no. A good patient is forever. A good doctor is forever. A good treatment is forever. It is the continuing flow of energy. To be cured would be, in one particular place, to stop that kind of energy transfer. And it's not supposed to be stopped. Unless you die, that's the only reasonable, acceptable way out of being treated. I mean, even life doesn't seem to complain about that. If you're going to die, it's kind of like life will let that slide. Also within that, it's just a little subtle twist that maybe you can get, is in this same thing I was talking about, is each creature, each human, should not be able to in any way directly report on itself also. Let us go back to the symbolism of a doctor and a patient in a very symbolic sense, the widest possible. The patient should not be able to report. In other words, the patient, the dog, should not actually be able to say much about eating grass. About the most it can say, it goes in, it tells the doctor, the treater, I keep throwing up. Well, you got any idea why? And maybe finally, you can say, well, somebody told me eating grass will make you throw up. I've heard that too, says the doctor. And he says, why do you say that? You mean you eat grass? And you say, well, yeah, I do sometimes. And the doctor says, okay, well, as long as we're here, could I ask you this? Why? And of course, we've already been through this tonight. If you're ordinary, who knows what you'd say? I've already covered about most of the possibilities. I don't know. It's probably some sort of obsessive behavior. It's something in my subconscious making me do it. I must be suicidal over a very gradual period of time. But the real fact is, and I was even trying to convey that when the doctor says, as long as we're here, could you tell me why? Because he's not going to know the, quote, the truth if he hears it, because as far as he's concerned, well, this is insane. In the same way that somebody doesn't drink, to ask them, why is it I watch you drink, and you throw up and fall down, and always you're breaking your glasses, and you wreck your car, and you get up and you feel terrible, and you just barely get yourself together the next day, and as soon as you get off of work, the first thing you do is go back and drink again. Why do you do that? I don't understand that. That would be the same way that the doctor I was trying to convey would ask the person, well, wait a minute, you mean you eat grass? Yeah. And before he got around to trying to treat that, he just said, well, why? There is no answer to why. He cannot hear the person tell the truth, if the person could. The doctor will not hear anything that would satisfactorily explain why somebody would eat grass and it makes them throw up. Why do you do it? There is no answer. There's not supposed to be an answer. The little subtle twist I was trying to get you to take a glimpse at is that no individual, no creature is supposed to be able to give any meaningful report on itself. The most they can do is talk about the symptoms. I'm throwing up a lot. And if really pushed, you might say, well, you got any idea why? Well, some people say eating grass will do it. You mean you do eat grass sometimes? Yeah. That's it. Now, after that comes the kinds of things that keep life churning, keep the accounts active, because then somebody's going to say, wait a minute, this doesn't have anything to do with the treatment, but I got to ask you, if you know, or if you got a good suspicion that eating grass is what makes you throw up, and you came here to be treated for throwing up, I got to ask you. I'll take your money and I'll try to treat you. Don't leave yet, but just between me and you, why do you do it? There is no answer. Or whatever answer is coming, the doctor is not going to hear as the truth. After a few attempts of the guy to explain it, the doctor's going to think, well, he doesn't know, the guy's probably nuts. But he says, you got a Visa card? The doctor will treat somebody nuts, as well as the next person. No creature is supposed to be able to report on itself. It needs somebody else to apparently undertake the reporting. For the doctor to go, well, and for him to make reports, not just literally, which doctors, of course, do. Priests may in their heads, your mother or father. The report is, well, the person seems to be, how shall I put it, a little weird. The patient admits that he eats grass. Has no explanation why, but does admit he continues to eat grass, and someone else is supposed to report. But then their report is not ever acceptable to anybody else. It may not be acceptable to them, but it's certainly not acceptable to the other person. That doesn't sound familiar. And now, get past doctors and patients, everybody. If somebody has got a piece of advice for you, your best friend, the doctor, it's your best friend, he says, hey, why don't you stop eating grass? How about getting off my back? Did I tell you what to do? Well, I'm just telling you for your own good. Worry about yourself. Plus, I've decided eating grass is not what's been making me sick anyway. It's something else. Yeah, but nothing. Somebody else apparently comes the closest. It is apparently you have got to draw somebody else into your dance, you and everyone else, if you're ordinary, to help report on you. In other words, for somebody else to give a better shot at explaining what you're doing than you can. But it's still not acceptable. But it's always as though somebody else is going to give it a better shot that everybody's walking around wanting to hear. Tell me about me. I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. I throw up a lot. I bet that's bad. Yeah, it is. But you're also soliciting. You're not just telling what kind of guy you are. You're trying to engage in an energy exchange. And the other person's supposed to say something like, are you serious? Yeah, I do. And are you the guy I heard that eats grass? Yeah. Well, you got any idea why you do it? No. Well, have you ever seen a psychiatrist? No. Well, if I was you, I'd go see a psychiatrist. Really? No, I'm serious. Well, I'm not crazy. Well, no, I've known you. I know you're not crazy, but I'm telling you, you're going to make yourself sick. The body cannot stand a continual, just throwing up. Dehydration can be terminal. You should go, seek medical advice, and if that's not working, go to a psychiatrist. There's nothing to be ashamed about. My uncle went to a psychiatrist. So apparently your friend is helping report on you, that apparently he knows better what's good for you than you do. But you still don't accept it as being the truth. You go, well, I'll think about it. Or you may argue with him. The point is, it is not a dead end. But it apparently requires that someone else help report on you. That, if you can't look at it, or if you want a more direct and perhaps cruder way, in the secondary world, most people, that is a kind of working reflection of what friendship is. Is that a person kind of helps report on you. Have I been acting weird lately? Well, yeah, you have. I figured, well, I knew that you and your wife are having problems. Yeah, I didn't know whether it showed that much. I was afraid it's going to affect my work. Well, I just know you're a little moody, but I mean, it's nothing weird. Did you think it was? Well, I didn't know. I just wondered. It's like somebody else helps report on you. If a dog could talk, and you said, why in the world do you eat grass? And assume the dog, which suddenly has evolved along the same intellectual lines as humans, the dog would go, hell, you're smarter than me. You're a human. Well, what do you think? That seems to be what everybody's looking for. Is somebody to help treat them. But it's also, the little subtle part, it's like somebody to help report. It's like for somebody to kind of tell you what kind of guy you are. That you'll first off admit, well, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. And you might even say, well, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. I'm the kind of guy that doesn't really know what kind of guy he is. What do you think? And your friends say, well, I've met people like that before. I mean, it's not that bad. And you go, oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, I bet you've been real busy. I've kept up with your career. You probably hadn't had time for a lot of introspection. No, I haven't. That's the kind of guy I am. I've been real busy. It's like you and everybody else, and you're dancing. Men and men, men and women, whole crowds of people, like a mass dance, you and a whole family. Well, I tell you the kind of guy I am. I've always been kind of, we know what kind of guy you are. We're your family. Oh, really? But then you want to argue. Or you want to criticize a little bit. It is never a satisfactory response. Because a satisfactory response would be morbific. It would be deadly. It would be life having little constrictures where blood is flowing. It'd be like losing little follicles in the lungs that can't breathe as good. Energy needs to keep moving. And in the secondary world, which man has created in a sense, between his fingers going like that. And that kind of beta mode, that kind of secondary or second order of creation, everything's unsatisfactory. That is, it's still open-ended. just because somebody is built, let us say that the great thing, which I won't argue, is the internal combustion engine. When it's good and tuned and maybe 300 cubes in it, there it is. And even not just the engine, but you got it stuck in a real nice frame with a good stereo, and you think, hey, this is almost live. But that's not the end of it, right? You got to put gas in it. You got to change the oil. Something's always going to break. You got to tune it up. Just having it is not the end of it. Just because it seems to be a thing specific, you haven't been cured that your itch was, what I want is a, and fill in the blank, a brand new Corvette, a Lamborghini. That's what I want, or a Chrysler. But just because you got it, that's not the end of it. Now you know that. If humans could say what kind of guy they are, and everybody around went, wow, that's astounding. I have never met a human that could just actually just walk in your face and say, all right, I'll tell you the kind of guy. In other words, somebody tell the truth about themselves, and he did it. He and everybody that heard him would be speechless. If it could happen. And speechless, that is not something to be admired in this relationship, this scenario I'm pointing out. It would be that energy was being transferred here and suddenly just stopped. The proper source to seek information about a creature at the ordinary level is not the creature itself. The creature is not the individual human. The creature is not intended to be able to report on itself. And whatever report it does have will not strike anyone else as being a definitive statement. It will not strike anybody else as being satisfactory. It will not be a final declaration or description of what the person is. But nobody can describe what it should be. They cannot. All they can say, well, that's not it. Well, what is it? Well, that's not it. Would you know it if you heard it? Sure. How? If no other humans ever, well, never mind that. To say it's open-ended is to, if I may turn a phrase, to say it's open-ended. There is no finality to it in the secondary world. That romance is not the same thing as sex. I mean, you get through with sex, if you're ordinary, you know when you're through with sex. If you don't, I'd advise you to see a doctor. But when you're engaged in sex, you know when you're through. But it's not true with a romance, with a love affair. You know that. Not at the ordinary level. You can come home and there's a sign from the woman that says, I have decided that you are the ugliest, most repugnant, smelly bastard I ever met, and I hope I never even see you or think of you again. You know, stuff it. And you'll stand and think, is she mad at me? Beatrice, are you home? Are you home? Grunhilde. The thing is, the woman could be gone, and you know this. If you don't, go read a comic book or something, or watch TV. And the romance, as far, let us say, as a man concerned, is not over. And it may be she's gone, and he doesn't see her. And it's 2 years later, and he's still talking about it. The romance, in some way, is still going on with him. Everybody knows that. But if it were not for this, you'd be talking about primary acts that were so immediate that if the primary acts could talk, there would be a kind of knowledge about the creature itself, about the organism involved. When it gets into the secondary world, and you have expanded it and becomes open-ended, there are no satisfactory explanations, and no one can hear otherwise. They just know, wait a minute, we haven't got it worked out. We haven't come to the end of our investigation of this, and nobody notices it. They complain about it. But they also don't notice, they can't, that if somebody that knew were dumb enough, silly enough, that said, well, look, you say you've never heard the right explanation, but how would you know if you heard the right one? And everybody goes, there is nothing to compare it to. It is simply not in the structure of the secondary world. There is no final sentence. There is no explanation. the processes are cut up into things specific by the intellect to produce a secondary world, but then the secondary world itself begins its own kind of infinite rejuvenation. It continues to create itself, which I said is, by all classical laws of physics in a three-dimensional world, is not possible, but you surely will now see what I mean, that in the secondary world, it creates the internal combustion engine. Whew, well, now we can quit. No, we can't. Now you got to invent gas stations. Now you got to discover gas. Now you got to discover nice floor mats to go in the car. Now you've got to discover how to get more voltage out of a battery to run a bigger stereo. Now you've got to consider who's going to insure this thing. It just goes on and on. Every secondary, and it's not just inventions, of course, the ideas of man. As soon as one guy says, hey, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am, somebody's going to go, before they even hear it, they're going to go, I ain't going to like this. And they'll stand up and say, all right, what is it? Because they're just ready as soon as you say, I'll tell you the kind of guy I am. And by the time you got your mouth, somebody's going to say, I'm going to tell you what, you're the kind of guy I never have liked. Now that you mention it, come here, let's go outside. And somebody will say, yeah, I agree with him. And somebody will say, wait a minute, I'm his cousin, you can't do that to him. And he looks around at somebody big and he says, I mean his second cousin. And then the bartender says, you take this stuff out of here. All right. And then somebody's walking in off the street and says, do you have a phone in here? You hear? All on the basis that nobody can report on themselves. Well, I guess we got to quit again.